Thank you so much, Bernhard, for welcoming me, and for everyone who's here. Perhaps you were already here a few months ago when I was starting with this presentation, and then I had some hiccups with my internet, and unfortunately we had to stop it. So this is the second round, and I'm hoping there will be no interruptions on the technical side. So yeah, thank you so much. My name is Mascha Gugganig. I'm a lecturer or akademische Rätin at the Chair of Life Sciences and Society at the LMU, here at the Faculty of Biology. And I would like today, I was invited by the MSCL to talk about some project of mine that is of interest in terms of science communication. And so I decided to prepare something that on a topic that had been studying a long time ago, which is vertical farming. And so I will maybe before we start with this, give you a little bit of a background of who I am and where I come from in a disciplinary sense in these topics. So I am a trained social cultural anthropologist, and I have been working in the last 10 years in science and technology studies as well as in environmental humanities. In terms of methodological approaches, I often do ethnographic fieldwork, though not necessarily in this context. I'm very interested in discourse analysis, how people actually make sense of the terms and the sort of discourses or the narratives that they use. And I'm also often involved in arts-based researchers, art science collaborations. In terms of the topic, my work has sort of moved more and more into contested technologies that are used in agriculture, food production, also in the sense of how we know things in a scientific way. So these scientific epistemologies, and that has led me to look at agriculture, biotech, in the biotechnology, controlled environment agriculture, which is the topic today. And then more recently, digital agriculture and small-scale farming. And so my question that I'm interested in is how nature is divided from culture and what role technologies and scientific ways of knowing play in this division or sort of like convergence also. And in that regard, I'm also interested in this knowledge power nexus. Who has the power to define what better or more sustainable or greener food production we need, what kinds of futures and visions we are confronted with, and others in more, more powerful positions envision for us or for wider publics. And as I said, then I'm also interested in how to do public engagement in various forms that often involve very creative methods and formats. So for this project or this talk on vertical farming, I will be presenting mostly data from a project I did together with partners in the Netherlands and in Brussels a while ago. And this was a project where we were actually approached at the Technical University in Munich as social scientists to do a citizen participation forum on vertical farming. We were interviewing experts, we were interviewing people in North America and in Europe, though I have to say that this is very biased towards more industrialized and what's often referred to as Western contexts. So I haven't really looked in that time. I didn't look at countries other than that. Some of the insights I also got from research on small-scale farmers in Germany and Canada, but those are more benign. So the first question that is quite important to ask is what actually vertical farming is. This was what drove us in the project. So my colleague Laurie Waller was part of this project in the first part, and we were interested to dig a little bit deeper what people actually mean when they say vertical farming. And one definition that that became very dominant over the years is from Dixon de Pomier's very successful book, The Vertical Farm, which was published in 2010, and really is often referred to sort of like a pioneering, you know, a vision to think about what it would mean what it would need to grow more food within urban contexts. So you have a fairly narrow definition here, where it's very much about these fully controlled growth systems. So you basically control all of these aspects, from the light to the CO2 levels to the nutrients. And you can basically set up these sort of black boxes almost anywhere in the world. And this is sort of the very dominant vision of vertical farming or definition. There are some more loose vertical farms where there are more semi-controlled systems, where you have maybe vertically stacked layers, and then you might have also light from the sun coming in. So there are some factors that could be controlled, but not all of them. And then there's a bit more of an adaptable vertical farm that is often integrated into existing building structures. So here is a prototype that was shown in Vienna, where they were taking the heat that came out of the underground railway system to basically heat up this setup vertical farm. Yeah, so basically, so if I were to take a sort of working definition, it's these greenhouse cultivations or closed systems. Whereas indoor is often, and indoor and vertical is often used interchangeably. So if you have ever heard about vertical farming, you've noticed probably that in the media coverage, it's often portrayed as this revolutionary approach and sort of solution for our food crisis and agricultural crises that we currently are facing increasingly every year, with the advantages that you can produce year-round in very high density. You don't need any pesticides or fertilizers. You can use less water. You don't have these long hauls, especially in the United States, where a lot of food is shipped quite far. And you can reuse vacant buildings, among other things. The critique that has also been raised for the last couple of years is continuously the immense venture capital investment that is needed to get this off the ground. The energy inefficiency, so you basically have to replace sunlight. The lacking economic viability, you've seen not just with regards to the latest energy crisis, you see a lot of bankruptcies in this industry. There is still labor inequality, and the question around social justice is still also often raised as sort of producing urban yuppie food. So, you know, kind of greens for fancy restaurants, and so these are issues that come up frequently. When we did this project that I was referring to before, we were thinking about actually understanding what vertical farming is for people that we consulted or that we asked in 2 museums. So we were looking at, we were sort of trying out this tool that we developed, and this was mostly Laurie Waller, who was you know, leading on this, to get a sense of how people that you know, our public was in the Deutsches Museum in Munich and then the Science Museum in London, to ask them what they associate vertical farming with. And what was interesting was that these, the tool that we developed was, the tool that we developed was the revisioning device that we called it this way, to kind of revision these very dominant visions that there are online on vertical farming. And we wanted to kind of see whether they are very different to those that are generated by more commercial actors online. And so we used, we looked at hashtags on Twitter and Instagram, and then for these museums, we developed this device, which was sort of on a tablet that we gave to people, and we basically played back to them 3 images of that were hashtagged with vertical farming from Instagram, and then they had to choose which ones stay associated most with vertical farming, and then we looked at these co-hashtags and saw, okay, what are these themes that emerge? And what was surprising was that they were not very, very different to the ones that we found online. And to us, this was also kind of indicative of the fact that vertical farming is just really not very much a lived experience for people. And that when they think of it, they do reference or think of these images that they see online or on social media. And we concluded that vertical farming is still a very highly speculative invention, and that it still requires a lot of sort of public engagement and understanding what people think of vertical farming, and what that not just the term itself, but the kind of food production that it stands for. What was interesting in this regard was also, as we're talking about science communication, that when we shared or when we did this event at the Deutsches Museum, the Bayerische Rundfunk, which is the Bavarian broadcast, came to make a short sort of feature on vertical farming. And what was curious to me was when the filmmaker was approaching me as the social scientist to explain to him what vertical farming is. Even though we had our startup partner present as well, who would have been much more of an expert on these systems, he was not interested in the object, which is this tablet, sort of the tool with which we were trying to engage the public. He was much more interested in this system, and he was sort of confusing me. And this is a very common thing in participation events, confusing the social scientist as sort of the spokesperson of that technology. And then this kind of often tends to happen, that there is this assumption that the social scientists are sort of closer to society and sort of educates the society about these novel technical systems. So this was sort of just to kind of add to this particular experiment that we did, that I think is also important to keep in mind when we talk about science communication and the role of social scientists. I'm just going to go through this very quickly, because if you're interested in reading more on this, this is actually a publication that will come out soon, where I was looking closer at these visions, or what's often called vanguard visions, vertical farming, where I was pondering on this question, like, why is this controversial food production system becoming this timely high-tech solution? And what are these arguments and visions that the proponents mobilize, and also which ones do not succeed? So this, I'm here referring to, or using the concept of socio-technical vanguards, or the figure of the socio-technical vanguard by Stephen Hillgartner, to argue that these proponents, who are a very heterogeneous group, are sort of trying to define and realize this socio-technical visions of the future of food production that have yet to be accepted by wider collectives. And I show in this publication that that vertical farming borrow very popular cultural concepts of containment and cleanliness, and also feeding the world. The idea that one can spare the land by moving indoors, and really fostering this dominant vanguard vision of this vertical farming as a very aesthetically sleek, automated, indoor-controlled food production system. And one of those clues, or cultural clues, is that you also saw popping up in the pandemic, was this idea of people sitting in these little greenhouses and becoming sort of cultivating more this fetish of going indoor, being sort of secluded or separated from your next door neighbor. Okay, so now I want to move to the second part of the presentation, where I'm thinking more about how these techno-scientific, these high-tech systems are actually shaping the relationships between different species. So here, primarily between plants and humans, but this would also could also involve, the insects and the bacteria, and so on. But for the sake of this talk, I'm going to talk mostly about that. And then the second question that I want to go through with you or present to you here is also in the context of science communication, what form of science communication and public engagement or public deliberation is possible or conducive to systems that are so contained and so kind of black boxed and separated from humans. So how could this actually be brought together? And I want to show you a bit of a longer quote by a startup owner that we interviewed. This was all virtual at the time. He was based in Silicon Valley, and he basically, in the beginning of this quote, he explains like what he's able to do with this highly automated system. So he can really collect a lot of data by using these environmental sensors and the cameras. And then he goes on to say that all of these things have relied on human eyes or hands in the past. So now we've moved on, and by removing the human eyes or hands, or at least drastically reducing the need for them, we will really save a lot of money. It will make things a lot cleaner. And basically, we're trying to have a closed environment where humans will not enter. We will only have our robot moving the plants around in the area. And I think this image shows this quite well. Obviously, not all of the vertical farms operate in this way, but this is also a very common way that vertical farms are run, and they reflect what Dixon de Pommier calls in an interview the barrier medicine approach. So he really took inspiration from this P3 barrier, which is this high security level that was invented to prevent the Ebola virus from escaping the lab. So you have this very strong idea that the human is a disturbance and should actually be kept out as much as possible from these spaces where plants grow. And what comes up in when you dig deeper into this, and what we've heard a lot when we were talking was this reference to the optimal growth condition. The idea that there could be a condition created for plants that is actually better than nature. So in this quote, you see even a startup owner saying that nature is okay, it's good, but too much nature is also killing the plant. So it's basically the human that can create a better condition for the plant to basically become free beyond natural constraints, I guess. And LED technology is very, very central in this, because the LED, sort of these spectrums that have been over the last 10, 15, 20 years actually been developed and evolved, they are often evolved and developed in a way that they can allow the plant to grow to lead more to the photosynthesis moment and to create more biomass. So this is often referred to in the industry as the optimal growth condition. So when you go into sort of a growth chamber, that was how our startup called it, you will notice one thing, which is you can't necessarily always see what is happening there. This is something that one interviewee shared with us, that when you go in there, because of this very purple light, which is helping to curb this photosynthesis, you can't necessarily see whether the plants are affected by anything, or if there's some kind of disease. This is also noted in the literature. But what also happens is something happens with you as a human when you go in there, because when we basically walked this, it was not this particular room, but it was a purple room. We were walking through, and we exited the room going through another door, And then all of a sudden, everything to me became green. And I was very confused because I thought, why is this room so green? Until I realized that this is obviously having an effect also on my eyesight and also on my hormonal household. So for humans and for insects, I felt very uncomfortable in this particular room. It was a very dry and very specific optimal growth condition for the plant, but not necessarily for me. And what it begged me, like this brought up this question, okay, that the light can be sort of a disconnector between me and the plant, or I can also get the sense of how a plant sees. Obviously, this is much, a bit too simplistic, but it gave me a sense that these conditions that we live in as different species can vary quite drastically. This idea of the optimal growth condition is not necessarily shared by everyone. So the plant researcher and the LED technology developer might look at something very different. So here we interviewed a LED technology developer at a lighting company, and he actually pointed out that beyond thinking about generating green matter, so this photosynthesis, there's a lot of research that can actually be stimulated by, the LED technology that can be stimulated by the kind of research that is done in the field. And this sort of corresponded to an interview with a plant scientist who said, on the other hand, that when we have new technologies, new LEDs that we can use, we can actually increase our knowledge of the plants as scientists. So not necessarily thinking about that in terms of increasing food production or consumption or increasing yields, but also what are all these other things that we can learn about plants beyond just photosynthesis. So in this way, they're kind of creating this co-constitutive relationship, the scientists and the technology developers, in terms of this relationship to the plant too. Now, this made me think of a fairly well-known concept by Donna Haraway, who talks about nature culture, constellations or nature culture in general, where she proposes that these natural organisms and the technologies, they're not necessarily separate from each other, but they form these co-constructive and very indistinguishable paths. So it becomes increasingly harder and harder to actually separate these. I could talk a little bit more about nature culture, but in this context, it kind of made sense to me because we have these sort of two different, the organism and the technology that are going into the symbiotic relationship to create something new. And they actually provide some insights to these multi-species encounters, or what I call the human-plant technology interaction. So what can we learn about multi-species encounters when we look at these kinds of human-plant technology constellations? So as I showed so far, there are moments where these species are connecting. So in this envisioned single contact, when we have an automated system, humans should stay out of the automated system. And the only interaction is in that one single moment when the human consumes the plant. There is a connecting species also in terms of plant science, where scientists are generating more scientific knowledge in these laboratory settings with the LED development. There are also instances where these species are disconnected. So humans that are becoming potential vectors of bacteria and diseases that are basically costly and really are not conducive to these sterile systems. The optimal growth condition for whom is a question that comes up. So a plant's optimal growth condition may not be the same as a human when they enter such a growth chamber, and it creates and sort of normalizes what I would call a biohazard lab aesthetic, where it's perpetuating this very 20th century long idea of visual hygiene, where we have these sleek and cleanable surfaces that bring with them also this biopolitics of purity and health. So we need to be separated from these species. It's also dominating species more specifically. So it's then also the question who defines actually that optimal growth condition. It's the human. that does it for the plant or the insect to reach increased productivity, again, for the human. And it's underlying this capitalist logic of a techno-scientific optimization, or what I would, sort of like a tentative word that I came up with is phytoproductivism. So productivism in the sense that this is a productivism that is interesting and important for entrepreneurs, for scientists or engineers, even though they all have slightly different objectives, whether it's creating more biomass or nutrition or any desired compound. So in the pharmaceutical industry, this is also a very big part. Or is it creating more research and scientific knowledge? Now I want to move to the final part of the presentation, where I want to think further on what that actually means for the people that are supposedly consuming these plants. So maybe one more thought. So what came to me, this was sort of a huge dilemma that we had in this project, because we were approached to do a citizen participation forum on a system that was so densely controlled and should actually not have humans in there. So how do we do public deliberation on that? And when I was I was participating in this Skyberries Academy. This was organized by an NGO on vertical farming, and I was giving them sort of a similar, we were doing a workshop, and I was giving the participants a sheet of paper where we were doing something similar. As I was saying before, we were not necessarily having these devices with the generated images from Instagram, as we did this in a museum, but we asked them to actually draw it themselves. And this last image I found very interesting. And this was in German, the person wrote, I translated this underneath the third image, from a producer's view, it's terrible to have many people or tourists in the farm. Also, the integration of residents in a nearby area is a no-go. And so, again, we have this sort of, when I shared with you the sort of human as a disturbance in these systems, this is also a problem, it seems, for growers to actually integrate, or how do we actually engage people, wider publics, into showcasing how these systems work. Another point that I found interesting or worthwhile that often gets dropped in vertical farming is this role of soil. This was brought up actually in a conference on vertical farming in Vienna again. And the label that was given to this, so there was sort of 8-9 posters, and one was on beyond vertical farming. So what is there beyond the current sort of vertical farming system that we need to consider? And this group was thinking about how vertical farming is not necessarily considering the role of soil, also the cultural history, I guess, of soil, and the critique that vertical farms are no different to factories, and that we need more soil basically to be integrated into these systems. And so this brought me to, and part I also talk about this in the paper, but in the context of how to kind of broaden these ideas or broaden vertical farming and opening up vertical farming, there are different instances where vertical farms systems can be sort of, how can I say this, hybridized a little bit more, or showing the different facets beyond this sort of black box idea. As I said before, there are these semi-controlled systems. So some interviewees have raised this point that for small-scale farmers, and this pink, the first image is actually from a farm in Quebec. They use these kinds of LED lights in rooms already to start an earlier season, so they can start growing their seedlings, and this is increasing more and more. You have these, again, these vertical farm systems that are adaptable to existing building environments. You have also, from an entrepreneurial perspective, companies that are including that are putting an emphasis on employment and what are the kinds of communities that are actually served. So not just the high-end restaurants, but underrepresented communities. This is a company in the United States called Vertical Harvest that also employs people with disabilities. And you can also see in this image that they're not necessarily, they're still using the light. So there's sort of like an openness to the space where these plants are growing. And then another one more recently, this is actually a picture of my current table. So last week we planted these potatoes. I'm not sure how successful I will be, but this is a desk that was created by Katlin Petruschkat. I don't know if she's here, but she developed this actually for the Fraunhofer Research Institute, to think about this relationship between me and the plants that that are right next to me, and that I actually have to sort of the experience of having to accommodate these plants that are taking over more space than I might be willing to do when I sit at the table. So these are sort of ways to think also about these multi-species relationships. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I know we're a bit running out of time, but one area that I find also quite fruitful is to think of vertical farming actually as a form of an exhibition in the context of a museum, or it could be in a sort of public space to not just present it as sort of the technological fixed solution to our problems, but to show again what can be learned from these systems, as I already showed in this presentation, but also how can wider debates be generated on the current food production system? So to think about where our grown vegetables actually come from right now, how are these? They mostly come from greenhouses. How are they different to indoor vertical farms? What should be the role of soil and sunlight? So having this public deliberation of what kind of food growth system people actually do want. Are they familiar and aware of the kinds of food production systems that are currently dominant? But also to think, to use it as a platform to think about these multi-species relationships. What are the relationships that we have as humans with the plants that we consume, and the technologies that are actually intermediary here. So in conclusion, I would like to give you on the way is to think of when we think of science communication or communicating vertical farming, that it's not only, or if at all, about the technical performance or the progress. Vertical farming is actually a kind of a mirror, societal mirror, or what could be called like a high-tech curiosity cabinet, where you have much wider contemporary issues reflected that go way beyond promoting just this one. It comes inevitably with that. Any time when you have a new technology, it's going to raise these broader questions as well, and trying to contain these broader questions is not necessarily going to be helpful. So they are always embedded in very specific sociocultural and historically grown contexts. So vertical farming in Japan has a different resonance in public than it has in Germany. What is the role of the land, the role of natural elements like soil and sunlight, etc. And these proponents of vertical farming can either dismiss these wider debates by saying like, oh, this is way beyond of what we can actually address, or they can actually consider the responsibility that they are not sort of ahistorically, they have not fallen off the sky. They are deeply grown in these contexts and embedded, and have also a kind of responsibility to engage with these discussions, such as how people would like to have nature and culture separated from each other, the technology from the nature, and what can actually be learned from these discussions. And that's it. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to your questions now.